The boardroom at Whitmore University hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same oil paintings of dead white men. Same mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Same uncomfortable chairs designed to keep meetings short. But today, everything was different. Dr. Gerald Haversham sat at the far end, still wearing that insufferable tweed jacket with the elbow patches, still carrying himself with the arrogance of a man who'd never been seriously challenged. He was reading from his phone, probably composing another scathing review of some graduate student's work, when Board Chair Patricia Nguyen called the meeting to order. Before we begin our regular agenda, Patricia announced, I have the pleasure of introducing Whitmore University's new chancellor. Haversham barely glanced up. He'd weathered 5 chancellors in his 30-year tenure. Each one had tried to modernize his department, challenge his methods, question his authority. Each one had failed. Please welcome Dr. Amara Jackson. I walked in slowly, savoring each step. 15 years of preparation had led to this moment. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with the rhythm of approaching justice. Haversham's head snapped up at my name. His eyes met mine, and I watched the blood drain from his face as recognition dawned. Hello, Professor, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Though I suppose I should call you Gerald now. Colleagues, after all. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The man who'd once announced to a packed lecture hall that this student will never amount to anything suddenly had nothing to say. Shall we begin? I opened my folder, revealing the first item on my agenda. A comprehensive review of the economics department with particular focus on faculty misconduct and systemic discrimination. His hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. Yes, Professor. The student who would never amount to anything now controlled your future. And unlike you, I'd done my homework. To understand this moment, you need to know about Economics 497. Advanced Thesis Seminar, Spring 2010. I was 21, first-generation college student, daughter of immigrants who cleaned offices at night so I could study in them during the day. I fought for every grade, every scholarship, every opportunity. My thesis, examining how microfinance initiatives could revitalize inner-city economies, was my ticket to graduate school. Dr. Gerald Haversham was a legend at Whitmore. Published in all the right journals, consulted by all the right think tanks, worshipped by all the right people. Getting him as a thesis advisor was considered a coup. It was a disaster from day one. Microfinance? He'd sneered during our first meeting. How trendy. How optimistic. I suppose next you'll tell me that cryptocurrency will solve world hunger. The data shows significant economic improvement in communities with access to. The data shows what naive researchers want it to show, he interrupted. But by all means, waste your final semester on this pet project. Just don't expect my endorsement for graduate programs. I should have switched advisors then. But I was young, stubborn, and believed that good work would speak for itself. I was wrong. For 4 months, I poured everything into that thesis. I conducted original research, interviewed dozens of small business owners, created economic models that even Haversham couldn't dismiss outright. He found other ways to dismiss them. Your methodology is flawed, he'd say, without explaining how. Your conclusions are unsupported, he'd claim, ignoring the 20 pages of data that supported them. Your writing lacks academic rigor, he'd scrawl across drafts that I'd revised 15 times. But the real cruelty came during presentations. This seminar met weekly, 12 students presenting their work in progress. Haversham turned mine into a blood sport. Ms. Jackson believes. He'd always emphasize believes like it was a dirty word that poor people just need small loans to bootstrap their way to success. How charmingly American. How blindly optimistic. How utterly ungrounded in economic reality. The other students would shift uncomfortably. Some would smirk, eager to stay on his good side. Nathan Wexler, his favorite, would actually take notes on Haversham's cruelty like he was learning technique. The breaking point came in April, 3 weeks before thesis submissions were due. I just finished presenting my final econometric analysis, months of careful work condensed into 20 minutes of PowerPoint slides. The room was silent when I finished. Well, Haversham said, leaning back in his chair. That was something. A few nervous laughs from the peanut gallery. Tell me, Ms. Jackson, do you actually believe this fantasy you've constructed? This idea that a few $1,000s can transform generations of economic disadvantage. The data clearly shows. The data shows correlation, not causation. A mistake I'd expect from an undergraduate, not someone allegedly ready for graduate-level work. He stood, addressing the class more than me. This is what happens when we lower admission standards, when we prioritize diversity over merit. Students who simply aren't equipped for rigorous academic work convince themselves that their feelings constitute research. My face burned. My research is solid. Your research is activist propaganda dressed up in academic language, and poorly dressed at that. He picked up my draft, holding it like contaminated waste. I've read undergraduate papers with more intellectual merit. In fact, I've read high school essays with clearer thinking. Someone gasped. Even Nathan looked uncomfortable. Haversham wasn't done. This student will never amount to anything in the field of economics. Mark my words. 20 years from now, you'll all be successful economists, and Ms. Jackson will be, well, perhaps she'll find work in some nonprofit, writing grant proposals that no one will fund for programs that don't work. The room was tomb silent. I suggest you consider whether you want to submit this thesis at all, he concluded. A withdrawal would be less embarrassing than a failure. I stood on legs that felt like water, gathered my materials with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and left. Behind me, I heard him say, "Now, Mr. Wexler, show us what real economic analysis looks like." I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. I almost quit, almost let him win. But that night, cleaning offices with my mother, a job I'd taken to help with family bills, she found me crying over my laptop. "Maija, what's wrong?" I told her everything. About Haversham, about the humiliation, about how maybe he was right and I didn't belong there. She listened, then sat beside me in the empty corporate conference room we were supposed to be vacuuming. "You know what I see when I clean these offices?" she asked. "I see men like your professor. Big titles, big egos, small minds. They think because they sit in these chairs during the day, they own the building. But I have the keys. I decide when the lights go on, when the doors open. Without me, they'd be sitting in the dark. It's not the same, isn't it?" She pointed at my thesis on the laptop screen. "You're writing about people like us. People they ignore, dismiss, step over. You think he hates your work because it's bad? No, Maija. He hates it because it makes him irrelevant. But he's Gerald Haversham. He has power." "Power isn't permanent," she said. "My mother used to say, El río siempre encuentra su camino." The river always finds its way. You just have to be patient and persistent. So I persisted. I submitted my thesis without Haversham's approval. It passed the departmental review, barely, despite his scathing evaluation. I graduated without honors, without his recommendation, without the graduate school acceptances I dreamed of. But I graduated. Unable to get into economics PhD programs, I pivoted. Got an MBA at a state school Haversham would have sneered at. Worked at a community development financial institution, implementing exactly the kind of programs he mocked. Built a reputation for turning around failing initiatives. My work got noticed. The Ford Foundation hired me. Then the World Bank. Then the Federal Reserve. Each success, I thought of Haversham. Not with bitterness anymore, but with clarity. He'd shown me what economics shouldn't be. Isolated, theoretical, dismissive of lived experience. I built my career on being everything he wasn't. 10 years out of Whitmore, I was running multi-billion-dollar development programs. 15 years out, I was headhunted for university leadership positions. When Whitmore's chancellor position opened, I almost didn't apply. But then I pulled up the faculty directory. Haversham was still there, still teaching economics 497, still crushing dreams with 10 years protection. The river had found its way. "Our first order of business," I said, watching Haversham's knuckles whiten as he gripped his water glass, "is addressing systemic issues in faculty conduct and student support." Board members nodded. They'd hired me specifically to modernize Whitmore, to address its reputation for hostility toward minority and first-generation students. "I've reviewed 5 years of student complaints and exit interviews," I continued. "There are concerning patterns, particularly in departments where tenure has become a shield for unprofessional behavior." Haversham's jaw clenched. "Chancellor Jackson," he said, voice straining for his usual condescension. "Surely academic freedom." "Academic freedom isn't freedom from accountability, Gerald." I used his first name deliberately, watched him flinch. It's not freedom to humiliate students. It's not freedom to dismiss research because it challenges your worldview. And it's certainly not freedom from consequences. This is retaliation, he sputtered. Personal vendetta. This is data. I slid a folder across the table. 15 years of student complaints against you. Disproportionate failure rates for women and minority students in your classes. Exit interviews citing your behavior as a reason for leaving economics. The pattern is clear. Patricia Nguyen, the board chair, picked up the folder. Her expression darkened as she read. Additionally, I continued, I've been contacted by former students interested in filing formal Title X complaints about discriminatory behavior. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. The room was silent except for the whisper of turning pages. The university's liability exposure is significant, I said. But more importantly, our moral obligation to current and future students is clear. What are you proposing? Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Professor Haversham has two options. Retire immediately with a negotiated settlement that includes a non-disclosure agreement and prohibition from teaching at any institution receiving federal funds. Or face formal investigation, potential litigation, and probable termination for cause. You can't. Haversham started. I can. I met his eyes directly. I'm the chancellor. I decide who represents Whitmore University's values. And you, Professor, no longer do. The meeting adjourned with Haversham stumbling out like a broken man. The board unanimously supported immediate action. Patricia stayed behind. That was intense, she said. History there. He was my thesis advisor, I admitted. Told me I'd never amount to anything. Said I'd be writing grant proposals for programs that don't work. And instead, I spent 15 years building programs that transformed communities. Generated over $2 billion in economic development, published in journals he could only dream of accessing. And now I run the university that gave him his power. Patricia smiled. The best revenge is massive success. No, I corrected. The best revenge is systematic change. Haversham is just one toxic professor, but the system that protected him, enabled him, rewarded him. That's what needs to be demolished. Over the next 6 months, we restructured the entire academic review process, implemented mandatory bias training, created safe reporting systems for students, recruited diverse faculty who understood that brilliance comes in many forms. Haversham took the retirement deal. I heard you moved to Florida, tried to get adjunct positions, but word had spread. Turns out, when you're not protected by tenure and institutional inertia, your actual value becomes clear. Nathan Wexler, his former favorite student, now taught at a community college. He reached out once, asking if Whitmore was hiring. His research record was thin, his teaching evaluations mediocre. Without Haversham's protection, he was just another failed academic. I didn't respond personally. HR sent a form rejection. The real victory came the following spring when I sat in on the new Economics 497 seminar, now taught by Dr. Kiko Tanaka, a brilliant economist who'd spent years documenting how traditional economic models failed marginalized communities. A young woman, first generation, Latina, nervous but determined, presented her thesis on using cryptocurrency to provide banking services to undocumented immigrants. Fascinating approach, Dr. Tanaka said. Your methodology is innovative. Have you considered expanding this framework? With work like this, you should be targeting top PhD programs. The student beamed. Around the table, her classmates took notes, asked supportive questions, built on her ideas. This was what education should be, what Whitmore could be. After class, the student, Maria Gonzalez, stopped me in the hall. Chancellor Jackson, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've changed here. My older sister went to Whitmore 10 years ago, majored in economics, but switched after a horrible professor told her she didn't belong. She always wondered what would have happened if she'd stayed. I thought of all the students Haversham had driven away, all the brilliant minds he'd dismissed, all the innovations he'd strangled in their infancy. What's your sister doing now? I asked. She's a social worker. Loves it, but sometimes talks about the economics research she wanted to do, about how different things might have been. That night, I drafted a new initiative, a returning scholars program for students who left Whitmore due to hostile academic environments. Full scholarships, mentorship, a chance to finish what they'd started. The board approved it unanimously. We named it the Second Chances Scholarship. Haversham would have hated everything about it, which made it perfect. 3 years into my tenure as chancellor, Whitmore's economics department was ranked third in the nation for diversity and innovation. Our graduates were transforming communities, challenging traditional models, proving that economics was about more than theories, it was about people. I kept Haversham's final evaluation of my thesis in my desk drawer, not as motivation anymore, but as a reminder. Next to it, I kept the acceptance letter from Harvard's PhD program, the one that finally came after my work proved impossible to ignore. I turned it down. I had bigger things to build. Sometimes, late at night in the chancellor's office, I thought about that day in economics 497. How small I'd felt. How certain he'd been that I'd fail. He'd been right about one thing. I never became the economist he'd envisioned. I became something he couldn't imagine. The person who made sure no student would ever endure what I had. The river always finds its way. Sometimes it just needs to gather enough force to sweep away the obstacles in its path. And sometimes those obstacles look an awful lot like tenured professors in tweed jackets who confused cruelty with rigor, tradition with truth, and their own limitations with universal law. "You're fired," I told him calmly in that boardroom. But really, he'd been drowning since the day he tried to dam a river he couldn't even see.